have a terminally ill patient, we put them in the intensive care unit, we balance the electrolytes, we stabilize the liver function tests, we stabilize the cardiac function, and we eradicate the infecting organisms. We give them 24-hour tender loving care and expert therapy, and very rarely and occasionally the patient survives. We must treat our planet like this, with incredible expertise, working only for life and not for death.
It is spring 1981. 1,200 people, 800 of them local physicians, gather in Meany Hall at the University of Washington in Seattle. Speaking are a preeminent economic historian, a professor of law, and several of the most respected members of the world medical community. The event is one of many held across the nation by Physicians for Social Responsibility, an organization created to alert the public to the dangers of the nuclear arms race. The story they tell began in Hiroshima, Japan on August 6, 1945. In a single flash of heat and light, an entire city perished.
If we talk about 1 megaton over Seattle, we are asking you to try to comprehend 70 Hiroshima bombs exploding in the same instant, in the same place, over downtown Seattle. 1 megaton airburst on downtown Seattle on a weekday during working hours will kill 440,000 people outright, or 36% of the Seattle metropolitan area population of 1,213,000 people. It will seriously injure and incapacitate another 360,000 people, or another 30% of the total metropolitan area population. The first effect of a nuclear explosion, faster than the blast, a huge heat flash traveling at nearly the speed of light, burning people, buildings, and their contents. Anybody making a reflex glance at the fireball at distances up to 35 miles away, varying with airburst or ground burst and varying with the size of the weapon, will be blinded by retinal burns. Well, 1 megaton airburst will produce third-degree burns at 5 miles, second-degree burns at up to 6 miles, first-degree burns at 7 miles. At as far as 10 miles away, there will be spontaneous ignition of buildings and their contents. The heat flash coming through the window will set fire to furniture and stuffed chairs.
The blast from that kind of explosion creates a shock wave, a luminous superheated wall of compressed air traveling at supersonic speeds away from ground zero, the point of the explosion. It causes immense local increases in atmospheric pressure, crushing skyscrapers, bridges, buildings, houses, and people.
Crush injuries, skull fractures, penetrating wounds, fractures of the extremities, spine, hemorrhage, shock, and the like, together with acute radiation syndromes. And the total casualties, the killed plus injured, come to approximately 800,000, 66%, roughly 2 out of every 3 people in the Seattle metropolitan area, with a single relatively small weapon, 1 megaton at an airburst.
Following the shock wave are winds, dynamic pressures up to several hundred miles an hour. Firestorm is a virtual certainty. It increases the lethal area 5-fold. Mass fires that consume everything in their path, burning from hours to days, reaching temperatures sufficient to melt steel and glass, exhausting the oxygen.
If each surviving physician decided that he would and could work, that he would expose himself to radiation, that he would work 18 hours a day, that there would be no inefficiencies of any kind, it would still be somewhere from 8 to 14 days before every such patient was seen for the first time by such a physician. And of course, what that means simply is that almost all of those victims will die without ever receiving medical care at any level of any sort, not even narcotics for the relief of pain. People will take anywhere from hours to several weeks to die of their burns, trauma, secondary infection, and the like. And it is literally true, as Nikita Khrushchev observed a very long time ago, that the survivors will envy the dead.
Seattle gone. If you don't live in Seattle, you're relieved it wasn't Los Angeles, or Salt Lake City, or Boston. But it could happen anywhere. It could happen everywhere. And if it does...
For those who survive the initial explosions of a nuclear war, the most pressing activities for the next weeks will be the maintenance of sufficient protection, fallout protection, while providing the essentials of survival in shelters. Many will fail in this task. Among the 93 million alive several weeks after the event, 23 million will suffer from severe radiation sickness.
The survivors try to maintain adequate nutrition and health in the primitive and hazardous environment.
Corpses, 100 million or 130 million corpses, could probably not be adequately attended to because radiation levels may be deadly for weeks on end. Upon emergence from shelter, the injured must be nursed, the dead buried, the debris cleared, the shelters built, or new shelters built, the next harvest reaped, the next planting sowed. And debilitating epidemics at such a critical juncture would have unimaginable consequences on all survival. Outbreaks of serious infectious diseases in various locales and the equally infectious fear and apprehension in rumors would curtail critical interregional cooperation, trade, information, and resource flow.
The Federal Emergency Management Agency believes that it is possible to immunize against serious diseases in the post-attack period. Not everyone agrees.
What about immunization? For several extremely dangerous diseases, this is the only direct means of control: smallpox, influenza, anthrax, typhus, and other infections. But vaccination programs in this post-attack period will simply not be effective because of the effect of radiation on the immune system. Vaccines are only effective for specific diseases, and they'll be very difficult indeed, particularly if an unfamiliar disease or strain emerges post-attack. Remember, producing the specific vaccine for the disease in question is difficult even in peacetime, as evidenced by the swine flu vaccination program. And in wartime, with the pharmaceutical industry virtually eliminated, it would be even more complex.
The arms race, as it now proceeds, does not strengthen free institutions or free enterprise, or however we denote our economic and social system. On the contrary, it is gravely weakening that system. And if or when, in some moment of error, anger, or panic, this race goes out of control, if there is a nuclear exchange, large, or as some now foolishly imagine, limited, what is called free enterprise or capitalism will not survive, nor will free institutions. All will be shattered beyond recovery. And so equally will be what is now called communism. Capitalism, socialism, and communism are all sophisticated social forms. None would have existence or relevance in the wreckage and ashes and among the exiguous survivors of a post-nuclear world. Those that say that we should accept the risk of nuclear conflict to save our system are saying in the strongest possible terms that we should accept its certain destruction. A year or so ago, a Pentagon spokesman, reporting on an optimistic internal study, said the United States, in the aftermath of a nuclear war, could sustain, and I quote, a medieval standard of living. To pass from the general to the specific, we may consider transportation. On this, after only the shortest time, all life depends. In the aftermath of the nuclear exchange, there will be no transportation system. Surviving truck drivers and trainmen will not accept for mere pay the risk of passing through areas of devastation or contamination. In consequence, the transport of goods will come to a halt. After stocks of food of varying degrees of contamination are exhausted, starvation will ensue. Likewise exhausted will be stocks of medicine and fuel. Starvation and exposure will be the fate of those so unfortunate as to escape the initial blast and fire.
Nuclear war poses a grave threat not only to the future of society. The preparation for war affects us today as well. Roughly $1 trillion was spent on defense in America during the decade of the 70s. Economist John Kenneth Gilbraith explains the consequences of these expenditures.
Capital in this magnitude can be used for arms. It can be used for private capital and investment. It cannot be used for both. If an appreciable part of this outlay had gone into the improvement of our industrial plant, as it would have gone had it not been requisitioned by the government, no one can doubt that our economy would be much stronger today. As we have pressed ahead on a narrow band of industry that serves our weaponry, we have left behind and left vulnerable our steel, automobile, textile, chemical, and a great range of other industries. We have been using our capital for industrially sterile military purposes.
Dollars spent on the arms race are taken away from purposes that could greatly benefit us today. One of those possibilities is improved health care, as Dr. Victor Sidel explains.
At the moment, among all the nations of the world, they are spending about $500 billion per year. That's equivalent to $1.4 billion per day. That's $1 million per minute that the world's arms race costs. Smallpox is now essentially eradicated, certified eradicated from the world. The entire cost of that program that eradicated smallpox from the world cost 6 hours of the world's arms race. The entire cost of the malaria control program of the World Health Organization is less than 1 day of the world's arms race.
And if military spending has diverted money from the society in the past, the shift in priorities will be even more extreme in future.
Bringing it closer to the United States, we spend $140 billion current, $140 billion per year, representing approximately 6% of our GNP on arms. If you add into that the expenditures for past wars and for past military programs that we continue to pay for in one way or another, that brings it up to $200 billion per year, or some 9% of the gross national product. That's $900 per person per year, or approximately $3,500 per year for a family of 4 in the United States. The Carter budget for fiscal year 1981 proposed outlays 3.3% higher in real terms after inflation than 1980. And the Reagan budget, as you're only too aware, proposes an increase in arms expenditures from $171 billion in fiscal year 1981 to, $368 billion per year by fiscal year 1986.
Health services are one of the first casualties of the arms race.
The National Health Service Corps is proposed for extinction by the Reagan administration. The entire cut for the National Health Service Corps, the entire additional budget that would be required to keep it going over the next 2 years, is $17 million. That's equivalent to 6 XM-1 main battle tanks. That's a little less than 1 hour of the U.S. contribution to the arms race for the entire National Health Service Corps all over the United States. Last night, several of the speakers in the symposium were interviewed on a radio call-in show. And one of the callers asked the question, what are you doing here? Why aren't you back home working with your patients, working in your health programs? Why are you talking about nuclear weapons? And the response from several of the physician speakers was, of course, that the detonation of nuclear weapons represented the last epidemic, the ultimate horror, and that therefore it was entirely appropriate and very, very reasonable for physicians to be doing that. To that, I added another answer. I said that I thought that my responsibility to the people and the patients of the place where I worked demanded that I work against the arms race now, because the arms race was one of the things that created ill health and one of the things that stood in the way of health services for people right now, even if the weapons never were dropped.
The question of guns versus butter has not always been an issue in America, as former President Dwight D. Eisenhower noted in 1961.
Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
Hideous as atomic war would be, there are some who argue that it is a possibility for which we must prepare, a fact of life in precarious times, an option even.
Basic assumption with which we are contending is the United States makes the world safer for itself by having more and better nuclear weapons. We make it safer for us by making it more dangerous for the Soviet Union. That is the essential premise of the arms race. This is perhaps the single most dangerous assumption in the world today. Our military policy is essentially devoted to trying to say we will make the alternative of nuclear war more likely and worse, and therefore the Soviet Union will become more reasonable. We are all in the same boat. The theory which the United States government, and I fear the Soviet Union, is pursuing today is that the way to make our end of the boat safer is to make the other end of the boat tippier. There is no way to increase the likelihood of the boat tipping over, increase the likelihood of a nuclear war, without increasing the danger to ourselves. We are engaged in a game of nuclear chicken. The theory is that if we make the boat so precarious, if we make the risk of nuclear war so high, these terrible, ruthless Soviets at the other end of the boat will behave very responsibly. If you share the concerns we've heard today, get involved. There's a lot to do to reduce the risk of nuclear war. There's the best group of people in the world to do it with. People to be loved, enjoyed, cared, shared, people to work together with, people to go on. I see no reason to be gloomy about trying to save the world. Be involved, not just intellectually, not just cerebrally, but emotionally as well. Here's a chance to work together, a chance to feel, to be affectionate, a chance to care, a chance to let some of your emotions hang out. We are blessed. We have an opportunity that no one's had before. Few people, even now, are really given the chance a chance to apply their convictions, their talents, their professional skills, a chance to apply our values and our highest moral goals, all together working. What challenge could be greater? We have an opportunity to improve the chance of human survival.